Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Jenny. I'm from Gina K Designs. Thank you so much for stopping by to spend some time with me here today. I have created this YouTube channel to share paper crafting tutorials and inspiration with all of you. So if you like the content that you see here today, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. I'd love to have you along my card making journey.
Today's video, we're going to be working with a technique using background stamps. So I've got a bunch of red rubber Gina K Designs background stamps here that I've already gone ahead and I've stamped and heat embossed using white embossing powder. So I've just got several different designs here. I've used some white embossing powder and silver embossing powder and gold embossing powder. Now, I double stamped this diagonal stripe background stamp by accident, but I figured we can still use it anyways. So I've got a set of Tailored Expressions rainbow blending brushes, which I'm so excited to use. I picked these up from Debbie, one of my subscribers, and I'm super excited to use these. Debbie, I hope you're watching and you can get some inspiration from my video today. So let's put these babies to work. I've got some Gina K Designs dye ink. I'm going to start with red velvet and I'm going to ink up my blender brush, and in a circular motion I'll apply the ink heavily. I'm just going to speed through this part really quickly just so that you can see what it looks like with the ink down. It turns out lovely. I just use my microfiber cloth to wipe off the resisting embossing powder so that there's no ink sitting on top. Then the next color I've got is Sea Glass, and I'm using the snowflake background stamp for this one, and I'll just apply the ink quickly until I'm happy with the saturation. And then moving on to the music notes background, and I'll use Gina K Designs Lucky Clover, and I'll ink this up. I like the way this one turned out with the green and the gold. It's a really pretty combination. So we'll just whip through this really quickly, apply the ink until it's nice and saturated, and I try to get an even look. So if I see that there's some lighter spots, I'll go in and blend over top of them. And now I'm using Lemon Drop for this one, and I'm going to apply the ink direct to paper. I'm just going to rub the ink pad over top of the embossing, and then I'll go in with the blender brush and just fill in any little white spots that the ink pad didn't get. Next up, I've got blue denim, and I've just inked up that background, and then we're going a little bit too fast here, but this is Christmas Pine. I'll wipe it off and then we're done. So I set these backgrounds to dry. I left them overnight and then I came back the next day, and there's a nice even coat of ink across these panels, and I was happy with the way they turned out. So what we're going to do is chop them up. We're going to cut these all into a bunch of little bitty pieces. Off camera, I cleaned up the backgrounds and cut off the excess around so that we have some nice clean cut panels. The stamps that I used, I should have mentioned earlier, but I'll let you know now. I used the Delicate Snowflake, this Rose Lace, Music Medley, Petite Flourish, Elegant Script, and Diagonal Stripes. And again, these are all deeply etched red rubber stamps by Gina K Designs. So I've pulled out my tonic trimmer on the side here, and I'm just going to slip the backgrounds into my trimmer and just cut different sizes of strips. So some wider, some smaller, so 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, just little tiny strips, and then I've saved a big piece of each one. I'm just not 100% sure where I'm going yet. I'm just cutting them up and then I'll figure it out. So I have not made these cards before. I have used scraps for a similar technique, but in today's designs I stamped them out. Instead of using scraps, I'm creating my own scraps. So I'm just chopping them all up here in different sizes, different thicknesses, and saving a piece of each design off to the top. We'll assemble all of these strips into cards. So I'm just covering a panel with some double-sided tape. You could use a variety of things here. If you have the Couture Creations big large roll like Jennifer Maguire uses, or the Stick It adhesive, or wet glue even, you can use all kinds of things. And I think I used some wet glue later on So I just go ahead and I use my double-sided tape and I cover the panel. It doesn't have to be all the way because I'm not going to chop this one up too much. So I'll go ahead and I'll stick that down and I'll remove the release paper and then start applying my strips. Now I think wet glue might be a little bit easier because you get a chance to like wiggle it around to make sure it's straight. For double-sided tape, once it's on and it's not going anywhere. So hopefully you get it right the first time if you're using double-sided tape. And if not, I mean, it's not a big deal. These are handmade cards. They're not perfect. As long as you're happy with the design. So I'm just taking the strips and I'm stacking them on top of each other, lining them up, making sure they're straight as best as I can. And I don't have any design in mind or following any sort of pattern. I'm just grabbing strips and adhering them down, just making sure to separate light colors so I don't put two pieces that are the same up against each other. So I'll keep going and fill it all the way up to the top of my panel. And once I've got the final strip adhered, I'll flip it over and I'm just going to use my bone folder to just really press against the back to make sure that everything is adhered to that double-sided tape very well. And then I'll pull in my trimmer and cut off the edges and clean it up. So we've created something so very unique and different, and we didn't have to buy anything else. So just using the supplies in our stash, we can really stretch it and make it go a long way. So moving on to the next panel, we'll make all of the backgrounds first and then we'll pull everything together into some cards. So I'm using my double-sided adhesive and covering the back of this panel once again. I'll remove the release paper and start adhering my strips. For this panel, I'm only going to use two designs, the green and the yellow, and I'll get those adhered. And once again, making sure they're as straight as I can possibly get them. And I just kind of line them up on top of each other before I press down. And they just kind of slip into place. It's almost like a die cutting inlay, sort of. This one had a little bit of a gap and I just put a little bit of wet glue in behind it. I didn't have enough adhesive on the back. So that's how I fixed that. And then I'll clean this one up, trim off the edges, and move on to the next panel. Here is where I switched over to liquid adhesive. I thought that this would work a little bit better for the technique that I wanted to do. I wanted to run strips in a diagonal, and the wet glue just gave me a little bit of time to wiggle it around to make sure that everything was pressed up against each other nice and straight. Okay, so I'll just go along here and I'll fill up the panel going back and forth. For this one I chose two colors. I found the very first panel that I did was quite busy and I wasn't quite sure I liked it. So I reduced the color palette down to about 2 or 3 colors per panel. I think just reducing the amount of busyness going on, I like the patterns a little bit better. Here's a finished project. Now moving into the next one, and I'm going to use the large elegant script piece, and I just kind of take my scraps, line them up against one another and see what fits and what looks nice, and there's just no rhyme or reason really to what I'm doing. I just kind of put them up against each other, and if I like it, I glue it down, and if I don't like it, then I pick up another piece. So for this panel, I didn't adhere anything down until I was confident with the layout. So I'll go ahead, I'll put my wet glue down, and then I'll start adhering down my pieces, and then I'll use my bone folder and I'll burnish the back of it. I'll trim it down, clean it up, and move on to the next one. Okay, for the next one I had an idea for a different sort of layout, so I adhered the petite flourish diagonally across the center, and then I've got the diagonal stripes, and I'm just going to cut this panel in half. I probably should have used my paper trimmer. I would have got a straighter edge because it was just a little off, but no big deal, we can fix that. So I'll adhere these two pieces down, one on the top and one on the bottom, and then I'll use my paper trimmer and we'll clean it all up, and then this panel is done. Let's pull in all of the panels and have a look at what we've made so far. I think this is going to create some really unique and different cards. I'm going to use these to make some Christmas cards. So we'll pull these all together in the end of this video. Let's get to that now. Okay, so we're jumping right into the card making aspect of this video now. So I've got a stamp set called Christmas Wishes by Gina K Designs, and I'm using the little mittens, and I'll stamp that in sea glass. And at the top left of my screen, I've got the little pine tree stamped out in 2 different greens. I used Christmas Pine, and I also used Lucky Clover, just so that they have coordinating colors to match on the cards. I've used a few different layering dies that I have in my stash to die cut the area where I'll stamp the focal image and the sentiment. And then I'll use the next size up from the die set for those panels to create a black mat for behind. It just helps the focal image stand out from the busy backgrounds that we've created. So I'm using some VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I'll use my acrylic block, and I'll stamp the Merry Christmas just over top of the tip of the pine tree. I think the black ink will tie in together the matting panels in behind everything. And I'll do that to all 3 of my Christmas trees. And then I pulled in a greeting from another Gina K stamp set called Winter Cheer. And I've just got a different style of Merry Christmas. Because the mitten die cut is a little bit smaller, I wanted to make sure it would fit nicely. So I'm going to stamp that with the same Onyx Black ink on both of my mittens. And then we'll move on to layering up all of these panels with some black cardstock to make the bright colors pop out. I forgot, first I'm going to adhere a piece of craft foam in behind my panel. I'm just cutting a little bit, about 1/4 of an inch off of my panels so that there'll be a nice black border around it. And I'll just cut my fun foam just slightly smaller than my panel so that it'll sit right in behind and give some even raised dimension. I like the feel of the craft foam in behind my panels. I just feel like it gives it a nice weight and a nice thickness, and they stand up very nicely. So I'm just using some wet glue here, and I'll adhere my fun foam panel, and then I'll glue the entire thing to the black mat, and then glue that to my card base. And then I'll take the die cut sentiment and I will stack that on top of the black background. So I'll just put some foam squares in behind my sentiment panel and pop it up on top of the black layer, and then glue everything down to my card base. And then we're going to call this card done. I only recorded the process for just this one card. Everything else was done the same way with the dimensional foam in the back with the black panels and the layering. The only thing that's different is the sentiment, the stamp, and the layering die set that I used. And so here is a look at all of the projects that we made here today. Take a look into your stash and see what sort of background stamps that you have, or even scraps that you may have that may work for this technique, and see what you can come up with. I hope that I've given you some inspiration today using your Gina K Design stamps. All of the products that I've used today you'll find in the description down below. As per usual, my links are not affiliate. I do not benefit monetarily in any way. Everything I've shared with you here today is just purely me sharing information and inspiration with you. So once again, thank you so much for spending time with me here today. I truly appreciate all of the support. If you like this content, make sure you hit the like button. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Click the notification bell to be notified of any future uploads, and have a wonderful day.